But as we mentioned in the structure, the internet certainly comes with inherent dangers. There's things that, as parents, we need to be aware of, and dangers we need to learn to mitigate. In the original document, Your Family in Cyberspace, the bishops say that the internet can be a little like visiting the best theme park in the world and coming across a toxic waste dump. Or to use an example from my own stomping grounds back near Orlando, it would be like visiting Cinderella's castle at Disney World, but then realizing that the surrounding moat was filled with gurgling sewage. And so how are we to respond to many of these dangers? Tai Chi is an ancient martial art that has been practiced for centuries. And the unique thing about Tai Chi is that it's primarily defensive. Its goal is not to go on the attack, but to use its own defense to subvert their enemy. And so in Tai Chi, if an angry, hostile aggressor charges at you, you don't resist or go on the offense, or his power will overtake you. Instead, you study his movements. You understand the force and, in a certain sense, cooperate with it. Only then will you disarm it. So for example, if someone lunges at you, you maneuver your body in a certain way that you deflect his force, and you cause him to lunge toward the ground, thereby defeating himself. So instead of resisting or caving into the dangers of new media, we can apply the same sort of mindset. That if we first understand the forces and negativities available online, then we can then learn how to maneuver around them and use the positive elements for good. When it comes to the dangers online, however, the bishops list out a number of dangers from back in 2000. Many of them still hold true, but in my modernizing of their document, I've grouped these dangers into two categories. One is explicit dangers, and the other is implicit. So first, we're going to look at the explicit ones. These are dangers that are immediately obvious when we think of new media, dangers that control young people's actions and that are immediately evident to their eyes. The first one, and probably the most prominent one, the one that parents are afraid of the most, is pornography. In the 2000 bishops document, they say, even if you're not looking for these things, they can be hard to miss. It takes only a few mouse clicks for an inquisitive child to find a sea of sexually explicit material or gratuitously violent material, sometimes disguised under web addresses that sound harmless and even helpful. A recent study found that 42% of teenagers admitted to viewing pornography online at some point in their life. And mind you, this is a group that admitted to it, so surely the number is a bit higher. The bishops say that even accidental contact with this harmful material can have its effect. In the case of pornography, they say, which tends to be habit-forming and to necessitate increasingly graphic material to maintain its thrill, internet pornography poses new challenges to personal responsibility and puts new pressure on marriage and family relationships. And so suffice it to say in this part of the talk that pornography is maybe the most deadliest and the most worrisome danger of the internet. Another one, however, is cyberbullying. This is a trend that we've seen in the past couple years where because of the internet's anonymity and because it's much easier to say things online that you would never say in an offline context, we've seen much more episodes of young people being bullied and having vitriolic language pushed their way. In fact, there have been a number of suicides already that have been explicitly attributed to cyberbullying. When you're online, it can be terribly difficult to remember that there's a real person on the other end of the digital connection. And so this is an increasing danger in this new media world. Another explicit danger is digital addiction. A recent survey of college students found that 38%, almost 40%, said that they could not go more than 10 minutes without checking their laptop, phone, tablet, or e-reader. We have a word for that in the English language. It's addiction. Facebook is another tool that has led to diagnosed psychological disorders. Way before these new media tools, back in 1995, there was actually a Center for Internet Addiction that was created in response to these effects. And their analysis states that today, 1 in 8 Americans use the internet in at least a borderline obsessively way. My guess is that the number's higher than that, and when it comes to young people, much higher than that. Yet, in addition to these explicit dangers, things that immediately come to mind when we think of new media, there are some implicit dangers. These are more subtle negative effects that maybe we've never considered before, but dangers that lurk every bit as significant. In the 1960s, there was a media prophet named Marshall McLuhan who coined the famous phrase, "The medium is the message." The medium is the message. And what he meant by that was any new technology, any new medium profoundly changes the culture as we know it. It not only transmits information in different ways, but it changes how people think, how people interact, and how people live their lives. And so how are these modern mediums changing our young people's lives? Last year, a neuroscientist named Nicholas Carr wrote a very important book called The Shallows, what the internet is doing to our brains. And in this book, Nicholas, through a good amount of research, showed that these new media tools are quite literally rewiring our brains to make us more distracted and to make it more difficult to engage in a sustained reading of a book or of a text. Because most of what we read on Facebook and Twitter and blogs tends to be more shallow. We tend to skim and browse and look for main points. That type of attitude has drifted into all spheres of life. And our brains have rewired us to make us more adept at reading and engaging material in that style. Nicholas Carr says, "Once I was a scuba diver in the sea of words. Now I zip along the surface like a guy on a jet ski." I think that mentality is quite dominant among most young people, and it's one of the dangers that we have to seriously consider. Another implicit danger is information overload. Consider this. If you read everything there was to read on the internet, nonstop, 24/7, it would take you 57,000 years to finish. And that's assuming no new material was added during that 57,000 years. All of us, but young people in particular, are bombarded with an absurd amount of competing information. Our minds and attention spans are tugged in multiple directions anytime we open up an internet browser. If we're on Facebook, we not only see the main messages on our homepage, but we see notifications and sidebar alerts. A chat window pops up. Likewise, when you watch a video on YouTube, the site isn't content with letting you just watch one video. They suggest dozens and dozens of others as you're watching the one you're trying to finish. And so our kids are constantly being tugged in multiple directions in this online world, a danger that, again, we'll be forced to answer. Another implicit danger is increased narcissism. One description of the younger generation is to call them either Generation Z or the I generation. Some say that the I stands for internet, the internet generation. Others say that the I stands for me, a narcissistic spin on the definition of their generation. So when you log on Facebook, as you see in the screenshot, the question it asks you is, what's on your mind? What are you thinking about? When you log onto Twitter, it likewise asks you, what's going on? What's going on with you? What are you thinking about? What do you want other people to know about your opinions? The University of Georgia recently created a global study of young and old people throughout the world, and they created what they call the Narcissism Personality Index. You know what the lowest ranking demographic in the entire world was? American teenagers, which may not be much of a surprise to many of us here. One vice president of a Catholic university said that culturally, I think we're setting ourselves up for a culture of narcissism. The final danger we want to cover here in this survey is online relativism. 2,000 years ago, Pontius Pilate asked one of the most important questions in human history. What is truth? And that's a major question for today's culture. What is truth? Does it exist? How can we know it? Where can we find out? And how is it defined? I have a screenshot here of Wikipedia, which many of you are probably familiar with. It's an online encyclopedia that in many ways rivals the accuracy of the Encyclopedia Britannica. They have hundreds of thousands of articles filled with information on any topic under the sun. But what's interesting about Wikipedia is that it's a communal encyclopedia, meaning that anybody can come and add or take away or edit information for any particular topic. Quite famously, a couple years ago, the comedian Stephen Colbert got all of his viewers to go onto Wikipedia and manipulate the Wikipedia entry for elephants. And so they changed the article to say things like, the number of elephants in the world has quadrupled in the last year, or flying elephants have been spotted in the Horn of Africa. And because so many people agreed that this was the truth about elephants, that became the reality. And so there's this subtle effect that Wikipedia introduces, an effect that drifts into all of these new media tools, that truth, morals, and ethics are simply defined by the crowd. If most people agree that something is true or right or good, then it is. If you watch some of your children's interactions on Facebook and they get into a discussion about an important topic, maybe a moral issue like abortion, if a number of the people there say, oh, well, abortion, I would never have an abortion, but I wouldn't say it's wrong for everybody else. If the majority of their friends think that way, then with this communal mindset, that becomes the truth and the reality for many young people. And so there's an online relativism that really pervades a lot of these new media tools. Okay, now after all those dire looks at the dangers of new media, let's take a breath and then look at the responses that the church gives to us. What does the church have to say about the internet and its inherent new media? In 2009, Pope Benedict XVI gave a message for the World Communications Day. Every year on January 24th, the feast of St. Francis de Sales, every year since Vatican II, there has been a World Communications Day where the Pope gives a timely message on a topic of his choice and presents it to the world. These messages are really short, usually about a page or 2 pages long. You can read them in 3 or 4 minutes. But they often speak great wisdom because they're relevant to modern communication tools. And so in 2009, for the 43rd World Communications Day, Pope Benedict said this: "The new digital technologies are indeed bringing about fundamental shifts in patterns of communication and human relationships. These changes are particularly evident among young people who have grown up with these new technologies and are at home in the digital world, a world that so often seems foreign to those of us who, as adults, have had to learn and understand and appreciate the opportunities it has to offer." And so the Pope notes that this digital world is the new habitat for most young people. I mentioned he coined the term the digital continent. And time and again, he said that this digital continent is inhabited by numerous people, many of them young, who need the gospel to be presented. It's where they are, and therefore where we must be present. 2 years earlier, in 2007, the Pope released a message called Children and Media, a challenge for education. And in that message, he said this: "The relationship of children, media, and education can be considered from 2 perspectives: the formation of children by the media and the formation of children to respond appropriately to the media." And so he notes the necessity of 2 elements. First, the way that media forms our children. We need to understand the effects media is having on our kids, but we also need to form our children to respond proactively to a lot of these new media tools. And so whose responsibility is that? Well, he continues, educating children to be discriminating in their use of new media is the responsibility of parents, the church, and the school. However, the role of parents is of primary importance. The role of parents in forming children in how to respond to new media and about the effects of new media falls on us, on the parents. He, near the end of this message, says this closing statement: "Like education in general, media education requires formation and the exercise of freedom." I love that phrase. Media education requires formation and the exercise of freedom.